Welcome to the Anomalous Review, the official podcast of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. I'm Michael Glosson. I'm a philosopher of science and technology and the host of the show. Today, my guest is a fellow member of SCU, Christopher Mellon. If you've been interested in this subject for a while, you're probably already aware of who Chris is and the enormously important role that he's played in this field. It's not an exaggeration, I think, to say that no history of UAP subject can be written without talking a lot about Chris Mellon from here forward. He's occupied some very high-level positions in the U.S. government under both Republican and Democratic administrations. He was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence under Presidents Clinton and George W. Bush. He was the Staff Director for the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And he was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Security and Information Operations. Now, the U.S. government is pretty bad at giving descriptive names to the positions in its bureaucracy, but what Chris's resume shows is that he spent a long time in positions where he had pretty much unfettered access to all of America's most sensitive intelligence and secrets. And it didn't matter if it was from the CIA or the FBI or the DIA or military. If there was a secret that America was in possession of and Chris wanted to see it, he could. And he used that access to push this subject into the sphere of public attention. Now, you're probably already familiar with the 2017 front page New York Times article that kind of burst the bubble on the UAP subject and brought it into mainstream conversation. That article featured 3 videos of UAP that were pretty quickly authenticated by the Pentagon as genuine UAP. That were videos were taken by sensors that belonged to the military, and those videos got into the hands of the journalists Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal because Chris Mellon gave them to him. I didn't break any laws or break any rules. Those videos weren't classified, so it was not a leak. It was just Chris's way of getting the subject the attention he felt it deserved. Because in the government and in the military, the UAP subject was not being taken seriously at all, he thought. And he's probably right. But he thought it was a serious national security issue. And after a lot of frustration, he decided the only way to give it the attention it deserved was to bring it to the public. That's just the sort of public servant that Chris is. It's a privilege to talk to him for this show. Not just because of the important role that he's played in the UAP field, or because of the high-level positions that he's occupied, but because I genuinely think that Chris is one of the most morally minded, sincere, transparent, nonpartisan public servants that I have ever encountered. And I really mean that. So in this conversation, I take the opportunity to ask him the sorts of questions that other people in his position might not answer so straightforwardly, including questions about things that he's said in the past that I really wanted to press him on. There was a talk that he gave at the Soul Foundation about the U.S. government's messaging for the UAP subject that I found, frankly, a bit disturbing. And I asked him about that, and his answers were as transparent and forthcoming as I think that they could have been. So I think that you, especially those of you who are interested in the geekier national security and intelligence aspects of this subject, I think you will really enjoy this conversation. So, without further ado, here is my conversation with Chris Mellon. Chris, welcome to the Anomalous Review.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm always happy to try to support the SCU any way I can. Delighted to be here and try to be as responsive as I can to your questions.
Well, I'm delighted to have you. So the very first questions that I want to ask, there's sort of 2 setup questions. The first has to do with the positions that you've held in the government. You've held multiple positions, but there's one and 2 sort of iterations of one position that seem like they're the most relevant to our discussion and the work that you've done related to this subject. So uh, the problem, though, is that the United States is pretty bad at giving accurate descriptive names of its positions. So you were the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Security and Information and the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence at 2 different times. Is that correct?
Correct.
What are those positions? Help us understand what those jobs are what was your portfolio of responsibilities? What authorities did you have? What access to information did you have?
Right. So the first position was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Security and Information Operations. And when that office was organized, a gentleman named Art Money, who was the Assistant Secretary for Command, Control, Communications, and Intelligence, if you want to talk about an awkward title and name with a very wide purview, together he brought his team in and we divided the uh, business area within the office into different sort of domains and tried to make them uh, clear as we could and mutually reinforcing. So, for example, in my first job, I was responsible for reviewing counterintelligence and security, information assurance, cryptography, those kind of standards. And we also put information operations in there, meaning offensive information warfare, because we felt that the defense should be informed by what the offense is doing. And when you look at some of the things that we're capable of doing um, in that world, in that sphere, it helps you realize what adversaries may be able to do and some of the vulnerabilities you may have. And we wanted to make sure there was a connection there. When I moved on to become the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intelligence, it was a different focus. It was more on reviewing collection, exploitation by intelligence assets. It was reviewing sensitive missions. The way I suggest people think about this is the Secretary of Defense, because he has an absolutely enormous purview. He's got like 40 agencies that report to him. He's in charge of millions of people, hundreds of military bases, uh, hundreds of billions of dollars of sensitive equipment and nuclear weapons and all these things. It's an impossible job for one man. No single human being could possibly get their arms around all of that at a high level of detail. So the secretary has a large staff that helps him sift and sort and focus and manage all of that empire.
All right.
And I was in the part of his staff that really looks at the intelligence and security part of the Defense Department and advises him. In many cases, he's the only person that can make a decision. If you want to establish a policy at DoD, it has to go to that one person or his deputy. Nobody else can sign off on it in many cases. So the secretary, if you go into his office, you'll see in those days, at least, there was a huge like table for a boardroom, and it was row after row after row of big packages waiting for his signature. Each one of those packages had to do with a complex policy issue or budget issue. There must have been hundreds outside his office just lined up that had all been coordinated and staffed and were ready to go. And that gives you some idea of the demands on his time and the level of responsibility he has and why he needs so much help in doing that. That's in addition to appearing on Capitol Hill, going to White House meetings, meeting with foreign government leaders and secretaries of defense and ministers of defense and all of that. So we were essentially his eyes and ears in a particular domain. In my case, it had to do with intelligence. And so the other thing I would mention is that many people don't realize this, but 80% roughly of the intelligence community is in the Defense Department. It's the National Security Agency, it's the Defense Intelligence Agency, it's the National Reconnaissance Office, it's the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Only CIA is outside that, the Secretary's direct control. Now, he jointly manages that portfolio with the Director of National Intelligence, but those are DoD organizations largely staffed by military personnel, largely functioning in support of military personnel and military operations. So there's a lot there that needs to be reviewed, and all manner of budget issues and technical issues and policy decisions and that sort of thing. And so it's a very busy place, and people in those jobs put in a lot of hours.
So would it be fair to say that you, or accurate to say that you had under your authority or at least access to 80% of the intelligence work that was being done by the United States?
Um, yeah, I had been also on the Senate Intelligence Committee for many years before I came there. And after serving in the Pentagon, I went back to the Senate Intelligence Committee as the Minority Staff Director. So I had very broad access to those programs and budgets and agencies in both positions. I had meetings every couple of weeks with CIA, with the Director of Central Intelligence in those days, DNI's person at CIA headquarters. I used to get people that would come over with, a bag chained to their wrist, sometimes with human reports, intelligence reports. And um, there's a separate process, though, for DoD Black programs that the intelligence community does not have access to.
Hmm.
So there are hundreds of programs that relate to weapon systems and Defense Department requirements and operations and acquisition and other things that are outside the intelligence community. And many people don't realize that there's also the Department of Energy has its own world of secrets. And all three of those, intelligence, DoD, and DOE, intersect, but not much. There are very few people. There's nobody that is deep across all three of those
Hmm.
that I'm aware of. Nobody in the government who's really deep on all of those,
But you were
um,
deep on the DoD.
and the intelligence side
Yeah.
on two of the three. I also worked with DOE. I had a Q clearance. I did some coordination with them on policy issues and things like that. Visited their national nuclear test site and so forth. But primarily, my job was when I was in the Pentagon was reviewing some planned operations that were sensitive and reviewing budgets, proposed budgets, looking at big decisions regarding acquisition programs, satellite programs. Are DoD's equities adequately represented? Is this appropriate considering our requirements at DoD versus the president's or State Departments or other consumers of intelligence, that kind of thing.
Is part of your job in character, not your literal job, but like when you're characterizing your work, is there an instinct to downplay the degree to which you had access to highly secretive and sensitive information that, could make for a good spy thriller or international intrigue or things like that? The sort of things that people wouldn't be bored by, but would have a rational, like, kind of interest in?
Well, let me say that one of the reasons that DoD Black programs don't leak is one because there so few people are exposed to them. But two, many of them are boring. And many of them are very, very technical things that the public would have no interest in whatsoever. They don't raise any policy issues. We have a new millimeter wave guide seeker on, some kind of missile, or we have a new way of making the armor on a tank more resistant to explosions, or all those, those kinds of things. So a lot of that information, people are surprised when they hear that the president doesn't know all this stuff. Well, it's not because he's not cleared; it's because he's got better things to do.
Yeah, it would be
You know,
overload. There's too
yeah,
much.
ridiculous waste of his time to sit down and spend all this time briefing him on all these obscure technical Black programs and things like that. Within that, though, there are some things that are extraordinary, and an example would be the B-2 bomber. For a long time, that was a Black program. And the F-117A, the public, and as far as we know, our adversaries didn't know we had this capability, even though it had gone through design, prototypes, uh, construction, acquisition, and actually deployment.
Hmm.
The F-117, there was an active duty squadron at a remote desert base, a secret desert base that was ready to go into combat. And the public had no idea that we even had a plane of that kind. So the Defense Department can keep secrets and does very well generally. And of course, they're always pushing the bounds of technology and trying to make technology our ally in support of our personnel and our missions. And those people do some great work and come up with some exquisite capabilities. The thing that's relevant about that to this discussion about UAP is not that I encountered any secret UAP programs. I didn't. But many of the assets developed in the intelligence community are potentially pertinent to collecting data about UAP. We have incredible space surveillance capabilities and aerial atmospheric capabilities and oceanic capabilities. And even the ones that are in the public domain, which the public unclassified, the public still generally is not aware of them. If you look up the space fence, for example, on the internet, or you look at our solid state phased array radars, uh, you might be amazed to see some of these systems, or our seagoing, I believe it is X-band radar, which is this mobile platform. It looks like something out of a sci-fi movie. I don't know, it's like 3 or 5 stories tall, that it can actually motor around. It looks like an oil rig that it actually can move around on its own and get underway at steam and go park itself in different places, with this huge antennas on it and
It's
so forth.
mapping the seafloor. Is that the idea?
It's collecting intelligence on different things like foreign missile launches and stuff like that. So we have tremendous capabilities, and it used to be frustrating to me that there were persistent reports of this phenomenon, and nobody was paying attention, nobody was looking, nobody was using these assets to try to uncover what this was, to see what's going on. And these capabilities are already bought and paid for. We don't have to go out and procure and spend billions of dollars for new stuff. We might want to, as we identify certain signatures, add to that inventory of assets some, modify it some. But the taxpayers already invested hundreds of billions of dollars in establishing these incredible capabilities. And now that we're starting to look, lo and behold, we're starting to see things, and data is being accumulated. And so we're starting to learn things. It's none too soon, by the way, because as we can see in the Ukraine, unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, and more sophisticated kinds of boats, in some cases, missiles, all kinds of autonomous vehicles with the application of artificial intelligence. They're increasingly intelligent, increasingly autonomous, small, hard to track, highly lethal. That is posing a huge and rapidly growing challenge for the United States and for any nation that operates and seeks to be a world power. So where other countries are pushing the bounds of this technology, it's not clear sometimes what we're looking at, whether it's from an adversary, whether it's an unmanned aerial system, or whether it's something more exotic. But it's certainly a time when we've got to be laser focused on those questions and figuring out how to identify these things, and if they are something adversarial, how to engage them.
So is that where your interest in this subject began? You sort of didn't have any initial interest in it, and then started picking up instances of like strange data, encounters at sea or whatever, and then that triggered it. Or did you have a prior interest in this subject? Tell us about how you became professionally interested and committed to the UAP topic.
Okay, I think there's a two-part answer here. I had been interested in the subject since I was a young boy. And the reason was because I saw a home video taken by a friend of my school's headmaster that showed in full color a UFO on a beautiful sunny day, cumulus clouds, blue sky, showed this huge disc-like object. It appeared to be massive, flying through the sky. It banks gently. It goes into a cumulus cloud, and you see it sort of disappearing behind the wisps of the cloud, which I don't know how you would emulate that or how you could fake that in those days before computer
Yeah,
generated
on a
imagery and
film
so
and
forth.
camcorder. Yeah.
It's hard to see how somebody would have done that. And this guy was not a sophisticated, computer or video, or didn't have video. This sophisticated photographer, let me say. And it emerged from the other side of the cloud and went off over the horizon. So that put a hook in me, and I had followed this subject very closely and read a lot of books. When I got into the Pentagon and got to Capitol Hill, I would occasionally hear things. A Navy pilot friend of mine called me up one day and said he was at the air base. He was training, I think it was maybe Hurlburt Field. It was in Florida, maybe Pascagoula area. But a Navy jet had been circled by a UAP, and he was on the runway. A lot of people saw it on the ground as well, apparently. He was on the runway when that pilot landed. And there was all sorts of excitement. And that pilot was trying to refuel. He wanted to go back up and chase the thing again.
Yeah, sure.
Because I knew him in college, he knew of my interest in this topic. He called me up. So things like that would occasionally come up, and then that's when this frustration would set in. Why aren't we, asking these questions? Why aren't we trying to figure this out? When you hear the stories about intrusions on ICBM sites and interference with nuclear weapons systems and so forth, reports from credible people, and you have to say, how could we possibly ignore something like that? That just seems untenable and outrageous. But I wasn't involved in it professionally until I learned that this was happening on a regular basis off the East Coast of the United States in multiple training areas on a routine basis. Navy pilots were seeing these things over and over. They were sometimes getting video. They were appearing on radar. They had no transponders. They should not have been in that operating area. They were creating a flight hazard. They were creating a counterintelligence problem because those carrier battle groups are doing workups and they're, rehearsing how they're going to fight in combat. And the systems they're going to use, an adversary can collect a lot of useful data in an environment like that. They can see what frequencies we broadcast at, what systems we deploy, and how we use them together, and look for different signatures and lots of things. So it was a real counterintelligence problem. It was a flight safety problem. And I was just amazed that people in the bureaucracy were content to just let this keep happening without reporting it to anybody, without investigating it, without doing anything. And the only person who was looking at this, the person who brought this to my attention, was a guy named Lou Elizondo. And Lou had been collecting information on this and doing what he could to try to spread the word and get some action moving. When I learned this, I tried to help him get to the Secretary of Defense, because nobody was like a hot potato issue. Nobody wanted to touch it because everybody's going to think I'm crazy. And, the stigma issue just was so pervasive that people were willing to put the nation at risk rather than put their reputations at risk. Hundreds, if not thousands of people.
So did this information come to
Certainly
you?
people in the intelligence community. What?
Did this information come to you as a somebody reporting a security threat, like they had compiled this information and brought it to you, or did you notice it in some other way?
So I was an unpaid consultant to the Office of Naval Intelligence. I had retired from full-time government work. But as a consultant, I got involved. I still have my security clearances. And Lou briefed me on this because I had an interest in this topic. And I was amazed. He showed me some of the videos, including others that haven't been released yet. He showed me some message traffic from the fleet. And then we met with some of the pilots. I sat through debriefings with some of the pilots, F-18 pilots, for example. It became very clear very quickly that this is very real. Whatever this is, it's something that appears on radar, it appears on film, it appears to be solid objects, it appears to be able to maneuver at high speeds, does not have an obvious means of propulsion, does not have obvious flight control surfaces. So I had just thought it was outrageously irresponsible to ignore these violations of US airspace. Unfair to the pilots, unfair to the taxpayer. Why are we spending all this money on intelligence to guard our borders, to build all these radar and air defense systems, and then when something actually shows up that's penetrating our airspace, we don't do anything about it? Don't even tell the seniors. Secretary of Defense didn't know this was happening. Congress didn't know this was happening. It was an unbelievable situation to me. It reminded me a little bit of Pearl Harbor, where a lieutenant detected the incoming Japanese aircraft at a radar battery. Didn't report it up the chain because they thought, oh, they must be just some of our guys coming back from a mission. It reminded me also of 9/11 because at 9/11 we had CIA and FBI not sharing information that prevented that attack. And in this case, we had myriad agencies that were getting information, bits and pieces, but it wasn't being assembled anywhere. Nobody was sharing it. Nobody was even talking about it. So I felt that there was an imperative from a national security standpoint to bring this to the attention of policymakers so they could decide what should be done based on their own estimate of the situation, whatever information they have. They might have decided not to do anything, but they deserve to have the opportunity to understand what was going on. They needed to have that opportunity.
You mean the public or the Congress?
I'm talking about the Secretary of Defense, Congress, policymakers. I'm all for the public knowing too, and that's very, very important. It's not just something that's good to do. It contributes tremendously to national security, public awareness, because public awareness turns into interest and pressure on Congress, which turns into interest and pressure on the Defense Department to address those concerns. So it's critically important for the information to get out, and that's the way it should work in a democracy. I was delighted to be able to facilitate the article with the New York Times and introduce them to Lou and provide them some videos, and which were deemed to be confirmed to be unclassified.
So you didn't break any law. You've been in. There was an investigation about this, and it was determined you didn't break any law or violate any.
It confirmed it was totally unclassified. Now the thing that's disturbing, concerning about that is that they investigated this, confirmed that these videos were unclassified, did not cause any damage to national security. In fact, helped national security because it made us aware of a vulnerability we had, which we could then start to address and remedy, which nobody was aware of prior to that time. So it actually helped advance national security. Amazingly, a year or two later, they put together a classification guide for UAP, and they said, oh, by the way, almost anything having to do with UAP, including in videos of exactly that same kind, which we just said didn't cause national security damage. Now we're saying that releasing the same videos would cause grave damage to national security. Well, that's just ludicrous. That's not logical. It's not sustainable. It's not true. And it's just an excuse for not sharing information with the public. And it was.
Do you think that's just like the natural posture of organizations like this is to constantly maintain?
That's what it was. That's what it was. It was a career intelligence person, old school person feeling, it was the typical intelligence community mindset. The less said, the better. We should keep everything close to our chest. And, we talk too much about intelligence. Actually, there's a lot of truth in that in many cases, but you have to know where to draw the line and what things are really important. We don't want to compromise sources and methods, for example, but those were not. And there was really no reason to not share that information. And there were a number of reasons why we should be sharing that information. And predictably, it did help to get Congress's attention. The most persuasive thing was the pilots themselves when they came in and met with members of Congress and the staff because of their credibility and as expert witnesses, firsthand witnesses. Their testimony is very, very compelling when you hear it firsthand. And I think that has been one of the reasons throughout that I have been taking this issue so seriously and been so forward leaning, because I met those people. I know those people. I trust those people. People like Commander Dave Fravor. He's one of those people, if you were going to be, in a lifeboat somewhere, he's the kind of person you want in a lifeboat with you, right? Very level-headed, very smart, very unflappable, not trying to make waves or get attention. He had no ulterior motive whatsoever. In fact, all these people were speaking out, were over their natural state was to not talk about it. They really didn't want to go before Congress, didn't want to talk to people about it, didn't want the attention, but they did it anyway because they felt it was important for national security.
Yeah. Nobody
And so
wants
I
this attention. Nobody wants to be, like, dragged in front of Congress and, like, presented
not
as
many people. If you're the executive branch, let me tell you, people in the executive branch look at testifying before Congress like, being dragged before the Inquisition or something. I mean, it's something that people want to avoid if they can anyway. It's generally not real pleasant.
so you have all this information in your head. You've had way broader and deeper access to a lot of information on this subject and on many subjects than any civilian does. And you take the position that more of what's in your head should be available to the public. Not all of it. Some of it would compromise national security interests or compromise individuals that are working in certain places, maybe, or whatever it is. But you think more should be made public, and even more should be made aware to Congress. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely fair to say. I think uh, we're now at about 1,500 official military UAP reports, most of those just from the last few years. And the initial reports, the majority involve multiple sensor systems. And so I have every reason to believe that out of that 1,500, there's got to be a lot more ad flare videos like the ones that I provided that equally were from not from sensitive areas. It wasn't like they were overflying, Iran or something. I mean, they're operating in U.S. restricted airspace, so we're not creating any diplomatic flap or anything. We're not violating sources and methods, and it's information that scientists can make use of to some degree. It can be used for machine learning, for training systems that are trying to automate the detection of UAP and so forth. Um, I'd have to look at this more carefully, but I don't see why more of the radar data couldn't be made available for study. Now, that is a serious question. We don't want to reveal the precise capabilities, but I haven't, you'd have to have a review of that and dig more deeply than I've been able to. But my guess is that there's probably a significant amount of radar data that could also be shared. And then there's the question of whether we can clear some scientific people. There are pros and cons to that. Whether there's any value in doing that. The intelligence community once did that for studying global warming and environmental change. And it really didn't contribute to the scientific community because they couldn't do peer reviewed literature, they couldn't really publish, and the sensors were not optimized for that purpose. They weren't, trying to track the retreat of glaciers and things like that. They had some imagery of that, but it really wasn't, a focus where they had a lot of files on that topic and so forth. So
Were they set up
it
to
can
fail?
excuse me.
Were they set up to fail?
Oh, not at all. No, it was coming from Vice President Gore.
Oh,
This was Al Gore's initiative, and he was genuinely concerned about the environment. He was dazzled by some of our intelligence capabilities and thinking, wow, maybe if we brought some of those to bear, they could help us figure out climate change. Yeah, it was a understandable thought, but it proved not to be
work.
very helpful. The
Well, if
scientists needed their own collection systems, and there are a lot of them now. They're amply funded in many ways, not as much as they might like, of course, but NOAA has a lot of very capable satellite sensors that are measuring particulates in the air and smoke and the height of the ocean, myriad things that
I
are
imagine
producing a lot of.
Tim Gallaudet.
Hmm?
I imagine Tim Gallaudet, yeah?
Oh
The
yeah, sure. Mhm.
I don't know. I would love to have a conversation between the 2 of you because I think that your areas of interest and knowledge would play beautifully together about this. But so we can say, given the complexity, I mean, there's no doubt that you really deeply appreciate the subtleties and complexities of implementing any sort of practical solution to this problem, though you take it very seriously and want to move forward. And part of moving forward, I think consistently advocated for is more transparency toward the public about what we know, whatever that may be. You know some of what we know that the public doesn't know, but you are doing a great job as a public servant of keeping your keeping your, I guess, obligation to not just wantonly disclose things. But given the fact that you do advocate for more transparency, I don't like the term disclosure. I think it's badly formed and charged with all sorts of strange
Mhm.
associations. So if I ever use that term, I'm not using it in the big D sense, just disclosing information. But I think a lot about the question about what should and shouldn't be made publicly available and why. And so I wanted to throw a few questions at you since you seem to be pro to some degree more transparency. So currently the public seems all over the place regarding their belief or knowledge about the UAP situation. Like there's I can detect no consensus about whether there's a there or whether there is or how much people generally are educated about the current intelligence content of like publicly available intelligence. But let's just say that transparency or disclosure or whatever means that we're just informing the general public about the nature of the situation, whatever that may be. Is there a disclosure situation that you can imagine that actually leaves the public on the same page rather than producing even more division and suspicion, etc.? And is there a disclosure scenario that the second part is there a disclosure scenario or transparency scenario that doesn't trigger all sorts of enemy nation states to produce counter messaging that's directly aimed at undermining any sort of consensus or faith in the message.
Well, let me start a bit with the second question, then go back.
Okay.
Uh, if we were talking about a situation in which an administration had compelling, perhaps conclusive evidence that probes from some other civilization had reached Earth and were operating here, I would think that prior to announcing that, they actually might well broach that with some of these foreign leaders to mitigate uh, their concerns, so as to try to put a united uh, front forward to help reassure the public. And that would, of course, have much greater credibility than any one single nation doing that. Um, we don't have a plan, to my knowledge, to how we would proceed on that. One of the intents of the Schumer legislation was to create a commission that would begin to work on a plan for broaching that kind of information if we do indeed have it or when we acquire it. Um, I think it's very hard these days to get a consensus on anything.
Yeah.
I think even in a scenario like that, there are some people who are so wedded to conspiracy theories of all manner, of all kinds these days, and things that are completely implausible. Um, and this is an area that's so fraught with uh, conspiracy theories already and distrust of the government that it's hard for me to believe you'd get anything approaching unanimity. It's also an area where there's a lot of emotional content, right? So some people, people's perceptions of the world and how they process information is heavily distorted by their emotions. If you're emotionally, deeply, profoundly wedded to something or committed to something, you're going to be looking for information, elevating information consistent with that hypothesis or that belief, and diminishing information which threatens it and so forth. This is something that plays a big role in a topic that is existential, as this is for many people. For many people, it's terrifying. They do not want to believe it. I always saw it as something exciting, interesting, uh, matter of exploration and discovery, and I didn't look at it that way. And it wasn't until recent years that I began to appreciate how many people do, and became more sensitive to the fact that they really genuinely do have those fears, even though we're not seeing any hostility, it's actually quite understandable. I think those of us who are not fearful are probably a small minority.
So that I
So those
think
kind of fears are going to interfere with people's, beliefs, and a lot of people are not going to want to accept that, even if there's compelling evidence.
no doubt, and a lot of people on a completely different access are going to want to accept or reject the truth of a message purely based on who says it in front of the microphone, or who's in charge.
I've often thought if Al Gore had not been the one who had been a flag bearer for global warming, if it had been a Republican, if it had been John McCain, for example, then a lot of the people who are opposed to it now might be embracing it. And a lot of conservatives are outdoorsmen and they're hunters and fishermen, and they want the environment to be clean, and they appreciate wildlife, and they could have just as easily have been on the other side of the fence.
Easily, yeah.
But this partisan mindset with which so many Americans are approaching so many issues is really destructive and distorting, and could be our undoing.
And intentionally distorting too, because Al Gore was the one who was championing a concern for global warming, and probably simply because he was a Democrat, the Republican response was to get the strategist Frank Luntz to think about how to reframe the whole issue, and he did it using a term climate change, which has become the dominant term now to de-emphasize the actual horrific truth that we're facing, and that's actually one. I mean, that their sort of rhetorical
Yeah,
strategy one, and now we think of it as climate change, and now that always invites the question: well, is it just climate's change over time, or like is the planet actually getting hotter and it's going to kill everything? But yeah, we lost that one simply, I think, because one party wanted to win an election. Not to say that that one party is the evil one, but in that particular issue.
yeah. I mean, the other thing is, of course, there's a lot of big money involved, right?
Yeah,
So the big oil industry, and my family's been involved in that industry as well, and they do actively engage. They have a lot of highly paid lobbyists and so forth, and of course, they had a motive to an incentive to try to mitigate the perception that their operations, their product was contributing to this. So in our system, this is another one of the fundamental problems with our system. It's all based on money. We have a democracy of sorts, but it's all based on how much money you raise. And we're talking, even for local offices or statewide offices, millions and millions of dollars.
easy. Yeah.
And those people can't help but be beholden to the donors to a large extent. I've worked on the Hill. I've seen how it happens. I know how it works. And special interest groups. And we have a Supreme Court that has said you can give unlimited amounts, and you can even, these political action committees, and you can even do it anonymously. So we've just given free rein to uh, distorting the political decision making process, and putting it in the hands of people who have the most money.
Yeah, and so we have this like tragedy of the commons sort of situation where we've got several problems that are just the American political system is just riddled with them. It's just rife with them, and we all admit that they're a problem, but nobody wants to actually be the one to do it. But you have suggested before a sort of historical case study that might provide a template for addressing lots of those systemic problems, including perhaps the UAP subject, because I get the sense that there's a lot of people on the Hill who admit that this is an interesting and important subject, but they don't want to be the ones to personally champion it because there's taboos and all sorts of other things associated with it. So I've heard you before, and I don't know if you've suggested this particularly in the context of UAP issue, but I've heard you before talk about repurposing the strategy that was used that's called BRAC, bases
Base
reorg
realignment and closure commission.
its realignment and closure commission, where after the end of the Cold War, we needed to close a bunch of military bases, and everybody agreed, but nobody on the Hill wanted to close the one that was in their district. So they sort of outsourced the decision making to a panel of experts that were appointed by jointly by different parties, real estate people and military people and but you know accountants and whoever expertise was relevant to this, and they said their decisions are binding unless they're vetoed by the president or overridden by Congress. And eventually that went to the Supreme Court, I think, in 94 or something.
Mhm.
And the Supreme Court said unanimously this is not an unconstitutional abdication of congressional responsibility or authority. It's totally fine thing to do. And you've suggested using that sort of strategy for like campaign finance reform, which I agree is necessary in order to save the country from just devolving into some kind of oligarchy. But uh, could it also be used as a UAP research solution?
Yeah, I was not thinking of UAP at all when I put that proposal forward. I was thinking of the deficit. I was thinking of immigration. I was thinking of campaign finance reform. I have a lot of interest besides UAP, and have tried to engage on some of those other things. And the beauty of this is that you get subject matter experts who are not running for office. They're not taking money from anybody, but they're selected by the leaders of both parties, and you can make them confirmed by the Senate or not. And there's a fail-safe mechanism. But what we've seen is when you get bright, patriotic people together with a range of perspectives, they usually tend to bond as they work through a problem together. They all are motivated by the best interest of the country, although they don't always agree what that is, but they're generally trying to achieve something and given the opportunity to do something great for America, something of lasting benefit. I mean, people go into the government because often, largely they want to help the country. They want to do something good and meaningful. To serve on a commission like that is an incredible opportunity to make huge changes that can have immense benefits to this nation. And I think there are a lot of people who would be honored to serve on those committees because they know it leads to something. It's not producing a report that sits on a shelf. We know it's constitutional. We know it's worked beautifully in the past. It worked so well, Congress has done 4 rounds of these commissions, and they've been frictionless, and they're saving us maybe $10 billion a year. And the bases that closed, many of them are now much more prosperous because they've been repurposed, and now they're flourishing airports, commercial airports or ports or different kinds of activities where they're actually employing many more people now than they were before. And they're really needed. So it's a win-win, and we're at a point where things are getting, in my view, desperate. Uh, if you don't adapt to a changing world, you don't survive, whether you're a company or a nation or a species. And we're not adapting well, and the rate of change is increasing. So we need something that is viable, that is constitutional, that can take the money out of the process and the special interest, the excessive special interest influence, and overcome partisanship. And this occurred to me as the one thing I could think of that was viable and can work in this difficult situation we're in right now of such a polarized nation. You could use it for a UAP related issue as well. The presidential commission that was proposed by Senator Schumer and Rounds, for example, is of a somewhat similar nature. You've got a commission. In that case, they're making a recommendation to the president as opposed to proposing legislation. But the president in that case is appropriate because he's got the classification authority. He's got the authority unilaterally to declassify or decide what should be declassified. But when we're talking about things that involve changing the law, we're talking about immigration reform, or we're talking about deficit reduction, those kind of things, you have to actually change statutes on the book. The executive branch can't do that by itself.
Hmm.
So that's why I proposed that. I've continued to try to circulate that idea. I think actually if President Trump had come in and proposed that, people might have said, he's a businessman, he's an out of the box thinker, what a great idea. They might have been able to run with it. I don't know. But I think we're going to get pushed in that direction regardless, because as we as the clock ticks down and the debt time bomb, gets closer to going off, and Social Security becomes closer to going bankrupt, and Medicare, and those things, we get more and more desperate. Eventually, we're going to have to do something. And if Congress can't come to grips with it itself and pass legislation to reform and revise the program and make it viable, then this is maybe the only other option. So I think you're going to hear more support for this kind of idea. Unfortunately, it'll happen in the future under more desperate circumstances instead of in advance, where we can prevent a lot of disarray and hardship.
Sure. I brought it up in the context of the UAP discussion because it seems with the death of the Schumer amendment and with the clearly impending total dysfunction of Congress, no matter who wins the next election, that it's going to be hard for organizations like SCU to rely on the government to,
Oh
or at
yeah,
least the legislature, Congress, to help push this issue forward for those of us who think that there's a real good reason for the interests of the country to push UAP research forward. So we talk a lot at SCU about how on the private end of things, or at least outside of the congressional sphere, how we can make progress here. And it's not just because we think the government is dysfunctional, which it very clearly is, but it's also because the government agencies or appointed groups that are working on this, I don't think there's a huge degree of confidence in them. And so let me give you an example and tell me whether you think the way I'm approaching this is right. So, like even the few government appointed or sort of ancillary organizations like NASA's UAP Study Task Group or AERO, even those groups that whose job it is to investigate and make public information about this w- have consistently made statements to the effect that everything we look at, there's no evidence that these are extraterrestrial in origin, right? I've heard that consistently from both of those groups. Uh, but I'm kind of horrified at that, not because of the content or the conclusion or whatever, but for the following reason. First, three reasons, I guess. One is that's almost never the question that's actually being put to these groups. I don't hear a lot of journalists or people in the press room asking, are these extraterrestrial? So they're not even answering the questions that are being put to them directly. To my knowledge, there's no definition of what would count as evidence of extraterrestrial origin in the data that they're looking at. And thirdly, the data that they're looking at isn't even the sort of information that in principle could determine extraterrestrial origin. Like radar data does not tell you where an object came from in the solar system or outside of it. So you couldn't even possibly in principle draw that conclusion. So when like Aero and NASA, which are the organizations that we're mostly looking at, come out and say things like this, it feels like intentional obfuscation. And if the best thing that we currently have is a gridlocked legislature and a few organizations that are not even answering the questions we're putting to them, but are intentionally redirecting and obfuscating and trying to confuse the questions, we've got to do something different. Am I being too pessimistic about the current state of things?
I think it's hard to be too pessimistic
No,
about the state of
no,
things
that's what
writ large.
I say.
In the country at the moment, we're in fairly perilous times, and it looks like it may get worse before it gets better. And that's a whole separate topic. But on the UAP issue here, yeah, I was concerned by some of those statements as well for a couple of different reasons. One, I thought they were premature. Um, to come out in when they're doing the study and they're doing, why would you announce the results of the study before you're done with the study?
Yeah,
I mean, I kind of feel like, they were still at the stage where they should be having, expressing an open mind. They were collecting data, we're gathering data. rather than we're putting out conclusions already. I have a second problem with that, the approach to this, which is that Arrow reports to the Defense Department and the intelligence community, the Director of National Intelligence. They're not in a scientific organization. They're not a science shop. They're supposed to be advising DoD and policymakers on issues based on intelligence tradecraft and standards.
Hmm.
Now, in the military and in the law enforcement community as well, we don't have the luxury of relying on academic scientific standards. How many people could you convict in court if you had to have definitive scientific proof
Yeah.
that somebody committed a crime? How could you prosecute a battle? How could you decide when to intercept a missile or when to, what the capabilities of the latest Chinese ICBMs are and whether they pose a threat? We don't have perfect scientific information. We never, we're not likely to anytime soon. Where we have it is great. That's what we want to use if we can get it, but that's typically not available. So we take what we can and we do the best we can with it, and we give policymakers our best advice based on that. And unfortunately, I felt as though this office Arrow was changing the rules of the game, and they're suddenly now hewing to scientific standards, which is a different standard. It's rather convenient, but that's not necessarily what the president needs to be hearing or senior policymakers need to be hearing. If those pilots from the Nimitz had said, we saw Chinese or Russian insignia on this thing, everybody would have snapped to, that would have gone straight to the top. And people would not have been saying, we don't have scientific proof that, that they were really Russians. People would have, been asking some follow-up questions. But when you've got 4 naval aviators seeing something at close range in broad daylight like that, and you have multiple sensors on multiple platforms with personnel tracking down radar, and you have an infrared video from yet another F-18 that went up to pursue this thing. If the question was, was there really a Russian or Chinese aircraft there in that case, it would have been hands down, of course. Nobody would have doubted their testimony. And in fact, we routinely have situations where Russian aircraft come across the Bering Strait. I mean, it happens every once in a while, and we send fighters up to intercept them, and they see them, and everybody just takes it for, they report at face value that they're Russian, and it goes into the newspapers, and they may or may not have imagery with it, but nobody questions it or thinks twice about it.
Mhm.
So I think they were applying a standard that is not appropriate for an organization playing that role. It's convenient if you want to minimize human testimony. But if that's the case, why are we asking pilots to report this stuff to begin with?
Yeah. What's the point?
We don't trust them. We don't think they're reliable. That's compelling information. Why are we asking all these pilots to report this stuff? Well, it's not perfect scientific information, but it's valuable information. It's important information. And it's information that the kind of information we rely on in military operations all the time. If we didn't trust our military personnel and what they're reporting, generally speaking, it'd be very hard to function. So I think I had some problems with those statements as well from a couple of different vantage points.
So is it, just to be clear, is it that you think they should draw or should not preclude the conclusion that they're extraterrestrial in nature, or are you saying that they shouldn't just um, dismiss the sort of validity of like some of these claims, like for instance that the some of these craft can accelerate to like 50,000 Gs or something, like those things are also being dismissed, the sort of just empirical data.
Yeah, so I'm referring to a couple of things. One, when the statement was made by the director of Aero that we don't have any credible information of craft doing things that we don't understand or know how to do ourselves, that to me is completely ignoring and disrespecting the testimony of many Navy officers.
Would you characterize it as a lie on his part, or as simply
I wouldn't
adopting?
go that I wouldn't go that far as to say it's a lie. I would say he was using this, in my view, inappropriate scientific academic standard. We're not in an academic community in the government.
Yeah,
You know, we go to war, it's not an academic exercise, it's not a theoretical proposition. The scientific community has good reasons for those standards, and we need those, and they need to operate that way, and that's great. But this is a different kind of operation over here in the government. And the president would be bereft of tremendous amounts of important information if we were limited to stuff that was scientifically proven. Might as well tell CIA to fold up shop and so forth. So, uh,
it
you know, I'm
doesn't. But
object-
for me, it doesn't get him out of the accusation that he's being intentionally obfuscating, because the academic community doesn't have an agreed upon um, set of criteria under which they would admit that a macro scale object had accelerated 50,000 Gs without a sonic boom. Like, there, our physical theories don't admit such conclusions
right,
to be drawn.
right.
So to say that, well, we don't have any evidence to draw the conclusion that this is, just to say that we don't have the standards, and but it's misleading. He knows that. He certainly must know that that's the case. But to not say the more subtle thing, and to just simply say that, oh, there's no evidence. There could be evidence, but there's no evidence, seems to me like not the not the
I
job.
mean, I think a more forthright answer would be, and we've heard this from the Director of National Intelligence, and we've heard this from former presidents who have all said, yeah, we see some stuff sometimes that we don't understand.
Yeah, but
That's
in
that's
your
kind of crazy. And you know, I think someone in that office, assuming that is what the data shows, should be forthright about that. And I think it would be good to have standards, maybe enunciate more clearly what we consider evidence, and what we're basing our judgments on. I think if we can demonstrate compellingly that, you know, with say multiple radars and IR and visual, that a craft is doing things like breaking the sound barrier without a sonic boom, without plasma at extreme speeds, uh, able to undertake, you know, right angle turns or whatever. That's very compelling evidence that somebody has advanced further down the line technologically, a lot further than we have,
absolutely.
and that narrows the list of suspects quite a bit. So that leads you to, you know, is it Russia or China? If it's not, well, okay, what hypothesis can you put forward? And the extraterrestrial hypothesis makes perfect sense. It's a perfectly natural fit if that is in fact what the data shows.
But you've said before, I think I can quote you. You say, and this isn't from your soul talk. You say, imagine you're POTUS and you learn the truth. Can you imagine a scenario where disclosing that info, say there are these things flying around in our atmosphere doing bizarre things, we don't know where they're from, or who made them. Can you imagine a scenario where disclosing that information wouldn't lead to tumult, or where the net result would be positive rather than negative? Um, you're not saying, therefore, don't disclose it, but you're saying, like, this is the burden of those whose job it is to govern, right? So
Right.
there
And
are these incentives for
I
them.
actually believe that long term, we would all benefit if it's true that we have compelling proof or evidence, maybe even definitive evidence that we're not alone in the universe. I think it is in our best long term interest. I think the difficulty for a politician, for a president, is how do you know, your number one job and expectation is security of the American people, to protect them from all dangers, foreign and domestic. That's job one for anybody. And who wants to hold a press conference and say, yeah, ETs are here, but we don't know where they're from. We don't know why they're here. I can't protect you from them. Have a good day. Nobody wants, what kind of a rational politician wants to hold a press conference like that? So that's where you get into, okay, how do we then manage this issue and handle it in a way that's consistent with our short and long term interests and hopefully with the truth? And that is what people were intending with the Schumer legislation by creating that commission. They wanted them to develop a plan as to how you would roll this out if, when you acquire that information, how you would inoculate the public, perhaps initially, so that people understand we're not seeing hostility. This has been going on for a long time. It looks like they may be, somebody else's NASA or a probe or something, and gradually reveal that information, if you do in fact have it. So I do believe that it's a challenge for a politician, for any president, if that information falls into your lap, how you handle that and what you do with it. It would not surprise me if a past president if they were advised that they chose to keep it secret. I totally would get that. I think probably most people in that position would do the same thing, but that doesn't mean it's the right answer forever.
I totally agree, and I want to push you on uh, this sort of subject, but I want to preface it by saying that um, I think you are genuinely an exemplary public servant. I'm really proud of you, and I'm grateful for the work that you've done. And I say that as somebody who is like has the sort of neuroses and self-destructive tendencies that don't allow me to suck up to people that I don't actually respect. So like I couldn't say that to you if I didn't think really highly of you. Now if it comes out in a few years that you're like hunting people for sport in Cambodia in your free time, like take it all back. But given the current knowledge that I have, um, you've done work that's changed my life. I wasn't into the subject for years. I had no real interest in it until there were some New York Times videos that came out, and now I'm hosting a UFO podcast, which is almost a nightmarish thought years ago. But all that said, you've done you've taken incredible personal risks and professional risks and made principled stances. However, I think that I detect a kind of cynicism in some of the positions that you take sometimes, and I imagine it's just the sort of cynicism that inevitably gets baked in after years and years of working with bureaucracy. I mean, it's not the people, it's the system that sort of burns out whatever that it just snuffs out whatever light of hope that is in you slowly. But here's where I hear the cynicism in two places. One, you say, well, what president wants to get up and make that sort of announcement that, I know my job is to protect you, but here are these things in the atmosphere. We don't know where they're from and what they can do, and they're more advanced. No president wants to do that. But we shouldn't just forget to mention that the president's job isn't to do the things that he wants to do. Right? There are
I'm
uh,
not saying that.
no, I know you're not. But I think that you aren't going to be the one to interject it because you just know that the reality of the situation is such that that's how these offices actually work. And so I want to say as a citizen that the president's job isn't to just do what he wants. That his job has principled obligations that he has to fulfill toward the public, and in a lot of cases, that's going and not a lot maybe, but in some very important cases, it's gonna require the president to come out and say something that may tank his career and create a bunch of problems for him professionally. You seem to have made a kind of decision like that yourself. Are we too I don't is it too cynical of us to that we're not expecting that?
No, I mean, I think this is a matter of weighing competing interests. You've got tens of millions of children who might be terrified, tens of millions of adults and people who feel vulnerable who might be terrified. And you represent those people. And there are times when leaders have to make really tough decisions about trade-offs. They don't want to lie, they don't want to deceive. They also don't want to terrify, 100 million American children and send them to bed having nightmares about, spiders coming out of the sky and eating their parents or something. So these are just practical considerations. And, there are principles here, but what are those principles? I mean, we have long ago, as a people, agreed that the government can and should keep secrets
Sure,
on our
absolutely.
for us, and our legislators have passed legislation concurring in that and laying around guidelines for that because they realize that we can't defend ourselves effectively in a Darwinian world if we're not able to do that. So I think we have to be nuanced and we have to understand. I wish everybody in this debate could sort of get off a podium and just look at the facts and stick to the facts and try to approach it more pragmatically and dispassionately.
I
There are a
think
lot
that's
of
what the
people
public
that,
wants to do, isn't it? But we don't have the facts to. Maybe we wouldn't be very good at it, but we don't at least have the first step of like the access to the facts that would help us to make a sort of practical decision about what to believe or what to do.
I agree that's very hard, and the government is largely responsible for that itself because it has violated the public's trust on many occasions. In this instance,
Specifically with respect to this topic, I mean, historically,
yeah,
there's no question that the government has
yeah,
engaged in complex disinformation campaigns and intended to make the subject seem uh,
that's right.
silly.
We had the Air Force saying originally they had a crashed spaceship at Roswell, and they said no, it wasn't. Then they changed their story again. It was actually a classified program that we didn't tell you about. We have all kinds of shenanigans. We have Colonel Doty or Rick Doty, I don't think he was a colonel actually, from OSI saying that he was paying a MUFON person under the table to spy on other UFO researchers, which is, uh, to my best of my knowledge, grossly illegal and inappropriate. So yeah, there are shenanigans, and I understand why people are confused and why people are skeptical, but um, the best way to proceed, it seems to me, is for everyone to try to be as faithful as we can to the facts and not leap to the conclusion that, well, because uh, this or that person said something, that necessarily the government's got a secret space fleet and there's a galactic council and reptilians on the council are making these decisions and telling the president what to do, or people extrapolate wildly, and it happens on both sides. There are people that who are attacking some of us because they think we're trying to roll the curtain back on science or promote paranormal sort of methodologies or something like that. I wish I wish people could, really try to stick more to the facts and reason from the facts and approach this as like, yeah, this is a real thing. We're in this together. Let's try to figure it out.
I wish that too, but the government has created such a vacuum of facts, and that vacuum gets filled with speculation. And you can't control it. When it's a vacuum, you have
Uh,
so little control over what lines
and
of
I think
speculation grow in there.
and I think what's exacerbating it right now, which is a totally self-inflicted wound. It's true that the government could not just make everything that it has public without compromising some very important capabilities that warfighters depend on. But they certainly do not have an excuse from withholding that data from Congress, from the oversight committees. And as we know, there's a great deal of dissatisfaction on the Hill. There's a great deal of feeling by our representatives who are cleared for these things and are serving on committees that have oversight responsibilities. And they're saying they're not satisfied with what they're getting. My advice to Arrow is take all the most interesting anomalous cases you have out of that 1,500. They're not interested in the 400 that you found out were balloons. mean, that's great. You need to do that, but
We would expect you to find lots of
I
that.
don't- yeah, we would expect you to find lots of stuff. That's not the interesting stuff, right? What they want to know is what are you seeing that could represent a strategic breakthrough by a potential adversary, or could be a probe from another planet. They want to know, is there something going on that's really anomalous, that really defies our present understanding of science and that sort of thing? Cull those 1,500 reports, take the ones that are the most difficult to explain, the most extraordinary, and brief them on those. And I've tried to suggest to some people on the Hill that they might create some language that sort of helps to push that and maybe requires a briefing or articulates that desire to get that sort of information. And they also need to make sure Arrow's getting the information. There's a real question as to what is being shared with Arrow.
Hmm.
And the real question in my mind, at least, I'm not convinced that I know from the outset the Air Force was extremely resistant. I know they were resistant to the UAP task force. I know they were resistant to initially to the congressional request for information. When they came out with a report, the first report in 2021, which was something that I had advocated for 2 years, and finally the Intelligence Committee did pick that up, that recommendation, to go with it. But when they came out with that report, they said, okay, we've identified 144 incidents report since 2004. None of those, maybe a handful, were from the Air Force. The Air Force said, we don't collect data on that. We don't have anything.
Yeah, they've been totally
We have
uncooperative.
nothing. And they're responsible for aerospace defense. They know that there's thousands of uncorrelated tracks every year. They launch fighters and scramble them from strip alert to try to intercept these things. We know
Uncorrelated
from
radar tracks. You mean we don't correlate them to something that we already see in like the FAA's flight database or something?
right. So we see something that doesn't have a transponder. It's approaching the United States at a high speed and doesn't, answer the phone when somebody tries to get them on the radio. And maybe they're heading towards a very sensitive area. Then we say we need to check that out. And we know that there have been cases. I interviewed a NORAD colonel, retired, who was at Cheyenne Mountain one time when a object at high speed started coming down from the Arctic. And the commander of NORAD said, I want that thing. The four-stars said, get that thing. They were launching everything they had in strip alert in the East Coast. They couldn't get a radar lock on it. They couldn't catch it. And yet the Air Force says we don't have any information about anything, anything unidentified. So there's a disconnect. And of course, people are scratching their heads a little bit. How can that be? When you've got the most powerful radars in the world, the most powerful space surveillance capabilities in the world, you're parsing, untold numbers of gigabits of data every hour, monitoring all these areas, and you don't have any anomalies. You don't have see anything that, is curious or doesn't fit the bill for a conventional, aircraft or whatever.
I mean, even private corporations have incredible surveillance capabilities. I did some side consulting work for a company that takes these incredibly high definition aerial photos of entire cities, like one every second. You can almost read a newspaper from, you know, all the way up, so that they can do things like track a robber after he's, you know, robbed a bank to see where he came from in the first place. Like that level of civilian capability has to only be a small fraction of the power and scale of the governments, and to say that to deny any information on something coming down from the Arctic, seems just preposterous to me. So
Yeah, it's kind of, it makes you wonder, well, does it go into a special compartment, or is it, there's so much stigma that they just let it fall on the floor and nobody follows up, which would be irresponsible in itself. How do you know it's coming across the Arctic? Well, the other side over there is Russia. And, is it coming from Russia? Is it a Russian platform? I mean, this is not stuff that you would think you would ignore. Uh, Intrusions on ICBM bases and facilities, interference with nuclear command and control. That's not the kind of thing that typically, you would ignore. It's quite the opposite, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so, so it is understandable that people have a lot of questions and a lot of skepticism, and it is largely the government's fault. I think the best first step to correcting that is to be really candid, as candid as possible with the public and with Congress. And with Congress, they can really get into a lot of the nitty gritty and the details at a classified level.
So just to pause, this conversation is going great. I want to be respectful of your time. I do have like 3 questions left. Do we have time for those on your end?
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Let's go for it.
So so you want more transparency, at least towards Congress, and let them to be maybe kind of a cooling dish or filter for what gets to the public. Maybe that's one way of setting it up. I'm fine with that, I think. But the decisions about what to think or what to say about this to the public are still going to be there. It once the information gets to the people who lead the country, there's going to be this question about like what to communicate and why. And when I was listening to your recent Soul Foundation talk, you said something that gave me real pause. And I spent a lot of time on a long walk trying to think through how to interpret what you said. So I want to read back the quote or the quotes that you used. You referred to two people. And I want to tell you the three possible ways I came up of interpreting it, and tell me which of those is the right way, or if some fourth interpretation is right. So in your soul talk at Stanford, you quote Yuval Noah Harari and Ronald Reagan, both to the same basic effect. I think Harari says a common enemy is the best catalyst for forging a common identity, and Reagan said something like, uh, perhaps we need some external threat, or uh, and perhaps there is an alien threat that's already among us. And you were saying this in the context of like the possible benefits of disclosing whatever the truth may be about these things. I mean, it does seem like there's some non-human intelligence on the other side of this phenomenon, whether it's properly characterized as extraterrestrial or not. We can leave that off the side. There's something there. There's some agency on the other side. And these two quotes in that context, and you were reading from a paper you had written. You weren't just speaking extemporaneously. These two quotes in that context made me shudder, because I think we all agree that the question of who our enemies are isn't a matter of choice. We don't choose, we shouldn't choose who our enemies are based on what it would benefit us to view people as enemies. You know, we don't, there's something like deeply Donald Rumsfeldian about that way of thinking. Like, oh, we'll see Iraq as an enemy because it would enable us to do this or get some resource or something. Who our enemies are is a function of what their values and methods and um, actions are. Let's say something like that. Um, so the three ways that I could think of interpreting your one, that you didn't realize that the internal logic of your statement was something like, it might be good for us to disclose whatever we know because we could see them as an enemy and that would unite humanity. That you just didn't realize that was kind of part of the internal logic. I don't think that's possible because I think you're genuinely a subtle thinker, and the nuance it wouldn't be lost on you. The second option is that you knew that was part of the internal logic, but that is just how you think. You are a sort of Rumsfeldian thinker, and I don't think that's true at all of you. The only other option I could come up with for interpreting you and why you would use those quotes in that context is to say that you have access to a lot more information about this subject than the rest of us. And given what you know and what you've seen, that came out as your most plausible judgment of the situation. Is there any way of interpreting you other than that last one?
Well, I'll tell you what's behind that, and you can draw your own conclusions. I am deeply, deeply concerned and actually rather pessimistic at this point about the path that we're on as a species on this planet. There are so many issues that are on the verge of getting out of control, including here at home, where there's sort of unprecedented craziness going on in partisanship. We're not effectively addressing climate change or global warming. We've got to deal with artificial intelligence, which is a huge new challenge. We've got biotechnology offering both promise but also peril in terms of genetically modifying our species, in terms of weapons of mass destruction capabilities that are available. That's also true with other kinds of weapons of mass destruction, like nuclear weapons. And these problems compound each other and they interact. And what we're seeing in Haiti right now, the anarchy and the hell that's going on there, is not so different from what's happening in some parts of Africa right now in Latin America. And those trends are not positive. They're going in a negative direction in many places. What's happening between us and Russia and China is very perilous. And so I'm just gravely concerned about the future of my family, of my children, of all of us. And I think if we have to come to grips with these things somehow, and my point is not that if there is an ET, they're enemies, but inevitably that would be perceived as a potential threat, and rightly so. And so that would have the effect of reframing international security, of reframing the worldview of people around the world and their leaders in Russia, in China, and here in ways that might help us actually overcome some of these existential challenges.
So in the
When I'm
intelligence
talking about when I'm talking about these things, of course, I'm also talking to different audiences. And so when you're trying to get people in the national security community to think more openly about maybe there would be some benefit to being more open. Maybe it actually would be in our best interest if we have evidence or proof that ET is here to get it out there. You have to make a case. All they're hearing is arguments on the other side. And their natural instinct is, don't share with the public, don't share with Congress, don't trust them, keep the secrets. And I'm trying to find a way to help those people see an alternative vision of that and an alternative way of thinking about it. It might be consistent with their values and perspectives as national security officials and people who are responsible for our security. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
partially
that's
it's partially there, but I do know that in the national security and intelligence worlds, there's a conceptual distinction between threat and risk. And you use the term threat. Risk is a situation where, just for in public way of thinking about it, is like you have some element of the unknown, and there's the possibility of
it's not a threat in DoD parlance because a threat is capability and intent.
yes, that's
So we don't have threat in that sense, but it's
from the
human.
UAP subject. You're saying
Yeah,
you're
from UAPs, we're not seeing any hostility. I've said that many times. I've said we don't need to increase defense spending. I'm not here trying to plus up some aerospace contractors, wallet or something. But nevertheless, if it's true and we don't know their intentions, we have to take prudential steps. We can't assume that they're here to save us or because they love us or something like that. So we have to treat it as a potential risk or a potential threat. That's just common sense.
agreed.
That's what I'm referring to.
So I think I read you more subtly than you intended, because the term threat, even though
Probably.
it was a Harari quote, and I know Harari. I think his work is great, but the fact that You use threat. It's inevitable when you're in a position where you know a lot more than other people do. We're always going to have to read what you say to see what the implications are that are unstated. And I think that there's probably some small group of people out there who heard you communicating that this is a threat, that from what you know, your best estimation of
Yeah,
this is
I've said many times we're not seeing any hostility. We're not seeing, but
because you don't have
we
to
do.
see hostility to characterize something as a threat. You just have to know their intentions and their capabilities.
That's right, and we don't have any way of knowing their intentions, so we, have to look at behavior. But what is disconcerting is, to some degree, is the interest and activity around military bases and facilities.
Yes.
And some people think that UAP are humans from the future coming back to look at us for some reason. And my response to that is, if you were a human from the future, why would you want to come back and go to W72 to watch hang out in a cloud to watch, some jets and Navy fighters pass by, and do that all day, every day, day after day? Really? So, we do have a legitimate concern there, why there's so much interest and activity in our military operations and activities, and we'd be foolish to just ignore that. We can't ignore that.
And this isn't just an
Um,
observation
it
selection.
isn't necessarily anything extraterrestrial at all. I mean, some of these things may prove to be, it probably will prove to be drones from China, for example, in some cases. I've written about an instance in which at Anderson Air Force Base in Guam, we had objects come over the base and they went right to the most sensitive part of the base on consecutive evenings and shone lights right down on the one capability on the base we have that can intercept ballistic missiles. You know, my guess would be that was probably a Chinese drone. So there's a lot of stuff that falls in this basket of strange things that are unidentified that are flying around, and we've got to sort that stuff out. But we have to balance these equities, and that's why I say, I wish people could appreciate the pragmatic aspects of this, because it's really not a simple, the American public has a right to know, therefore we just tell them everything, or it's national security, therefore we can't tell the American people anything. There's a lot of nuanced places in between those two extreme positions that are viable, in my view, that are appropriate, that we can do better at and try to regain the public's trust.
So last few questions. If you had unlimited budget, unlimited resources, and unlimited authority within, the realms of the law to study this phenomenon, how would you go about doing it?
Well, I think we've got a reasonable start with Arrow. We're promulgating reporting requirements. We're requiring now military personnel to report. Ryan Graves and others are working with Americans for Safe Aerospace to get commercial pilots to report. There's some private companies like Enigma Labs that are building apps for people that can help collect data, MUFON, and so forth. I think where we need, and I've heard things that I don't know if they're true or not. I've heard from some people who are credible that we actually do have some signatures, that we're able to, that some of these things, when they hit the atmosphere, they give off a signal, and we know what that signal is. And there's a couple different signals and we can track them. I don't know if that's true. But so the first thing I want to know is, what do we actually really know? And what do we know about signatures? And what do we have that can detect those signatures to track these things and get a better handle on where they're coming from and what their agenda might be?
So for the organizations that already exist, like SCU and um, Arrow and UAPX and all these other sort of civilian run organizations, there's like, you know not a lot of cooperation going on, and it seems like we're going to have to take the helm moving forward. And I worry that we're going to devolve into the same sort of like siloed, partisan, unsharing dynamic that characterizes a lot of the government bureaucracies. And we'll each have our own set of data that we don't share with each other. We'll see each other as competitors. How do you advise us collectively as that group, including UAP, and all these others, the Galileo Project and Soul Foundation. How do we all move forward in a way that maximizes cooperation and collaboration?
Yeah, you reminded me of something that relates to an earlier question. You asked how I got involved in this professionally. And it actually started when I joined the board of UAP Data, or UFO Data, it was called. And it was an organization trying to raise money to build scientific sensors to collect data. And as a board member, to try to get some attention, I wrote an article in the Huffington Post. And a guy named Tom DeLong, who was crazy about the UFO topic, saw that and called me up. And he was pulling some people in. And that led me on the path that actually eventually got me connected to Lou Elizondo and so forth. So my point being, I have long supported civilian scientific research on this topic from when I first joined the board of that organization. So I think these civilian research efforts are great. I think they're important, all the more so when the government is not sharing information, and the government also has a different perspective because even though they're talking about scientific criteria, DoD and intelligence community are not scientific organizations. That's not really what they do and what they're about, and I don't think they're going to really approach this as a science project. I think they're going to approach it as a national security project. So I think the civilian science organizations, I took this interview because I want to do whatever I can, whenever I can, to support the SCU. I work with the Galileo Project. I've had some success lately helping them win a grant to deploy sensors at another site. I try to collaborate and network with everybody in this space that I can. Ryan Graves and his organization, people to debrief, George Knapp, and people on the Hill, and everybody I can. And I think if we all approach this in good faith and share information, we'll learn from one another and we'll move forward together more effectively. So I know the SCU people are talking to UAPX and others and talking to the government, and I think that's great. It's not what we'd like it to be yet, but it's a good start. It's important. It needs to be done.
So, Chris Mellon, thank you so much for your time. This has been a fantastic talk, and I think it's made a lot of progress, or well, made steps of progress toward laying out some of the intricacies of the subject and of the sort of bureaucratic machinery that we need to understand in order to appreciate the difficulty that we face in making progress on this really mysterious topic that's mysterious in its own ways, but also is sort of mediated by a lot of rules and bureaucracies and norms that are themselves super hard to understand. So I think you were the perfect person to help us uh, illuminate some of that, and I'm really grateful for your time.
Well, I hope I'm contributing. And as I say, I'm a big supporter of Mr. Powell and the SCU and all you guys are doing, and eager to help anytime I can.
Well, we'll look forward to having you back on. The Anomalous Review is a project of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. It's hosted and produced by me, Michael Glosson, and edited by Kelly Michelle. Our theme song was written and performed by Telma Crisanti. Communication and PR work is by Preston Dykes. Our advisory team includes Jennifer Roach, Robert Powell, Richard Hoffman, Joshua Pearson, and Larry Hancock. To find out more about SCU, check out explorescu.org.